Jesus in the gospel takes John and the apostles on a teaching journey. We have John approaching him about this person who is exercising, but it's not one of them. And Jesus takes him from that place to speaking about our hidden faults, and then how our faults can cause the downfall of others, and so the necessity of ourselves to be completely intolerant towards sin, especially in our own lives. So, what have we got? We've got John, the apostles. Just a little bit of context for John, and actually we see the same in the gospel and in the first reading. Almost exactly the same thing is happening. In the first reading, Moses has chosen 70 elders, and the Lord has poured out his Spirit, taken some of the Spirit that's on Moses and poured it out onto these 70. But 2 of them are not there, and because they weren't there at the time, they were in the camp. And yet the Spirit of God still fell upon them. Joshua seems to be concerned for the authority of Moses. They weren't there at the time. They should have been there at the tent. They weren't at the tent, but they were in the camp. They shouldn't be in the camp. They should have been at the tent, and therefore they should be excluded. They shouldn't be prophesying. And Joshua, like a little child, is telling on these 2 other kids who have not done as they should have done. And that sort of behavior we see also with John. John is the same sort of almost childish behavior going on. These kids aren't been playing with us. They're not one of us. This man who's the exorcist, and therefore tell him to stop. I don't know if you've had your kids do the same to you. So-and-so is not doing something right. Tell them to stop. They're not allowed to play with us anymore. And it's interesting because in the gospel, the apostles have been given the authority to cast out demons. In Mark 3, they're given this authority. Then in Mark 6, you see them doing exactly the same again. And here in Mark 9, what's really interesting is that they've come across a man whom they couldn't cast a demon out of. They couldn't do it. And Jesus had to do it for him. And then directly after that, Jesus has told them that he's going to suffer and to die. And they start arguing about who is the greatest. So it's all about them, power, authority, and themselves. And so here we have again the disciples not understanding Jesus. Jesus has said, unless you become like one of these little ones, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And then this chap turns up doing what they could not do, casting out the demon. And above that, he wasn't one of them. John appears to be defending the honor of Jesus' name. He's not one of us. He hasn't been given this authority. He should not be doing this. It's wrong. But John actually, and the other disciples, are not concerned about Jesus' name, really. They're more concerned about their own authority, their own position. They are one of the 12. They're one of the special people. They're one of the chosen, and this man is not. They've been given this authority. This man has not. We should be able to cast out demons. That man should not. And yet he does. And yet he does. And they're upset. We couldn't do it. This man could. We've got the authority. He doesn't. And yet he could do it. And so they want to shut him down. Jesus isn't so worried. Just like Moses wasn't so worried. Oh, that all the people of God could prophesy. That all of us could prophesy. That the Holy Spirit would come upon all of us so that we could do the same. That man was freeing somebody from bondage. He was doing good. And Jesus was happy with that. Don't stop him. He's speaking in my name, and he's speaking with power. Let him continue. And then he starts to kind of point out where John and the others are really coming from. This selfishness of theirs. this hidden sin that the psalm talks about. From hidden fault, acquit me. The sort of sin we don't actually see in our own lives. And it is a sin that is all about me and my position, and they've forgotten what they're there for. They've forgotten whom they're disciples of. They're disciples of Jesus Christ. They're not the masters themselves, and they've started to focus on themselves. And we can begin to do that. This was what James is speaking about the rich. He's saying to the rich, start crying and weeping for the miseries that are coming to you. Why? Because they've become so engaged in themselves and what they can gain for themselves. I should say we do that. We start focusing on ourselves and forget who it is we're serving. And it becomes about me. And we don't often realize that that's the case. Sometimes it just becomes part of our lives, and these ways of behaving seem to be natural. This is the way life ought to be. And Jesus wants us to be able to see these hidden faults and change them. But they're difficult. Because when we have to try to get rid of them, Jesus was very tolerant of this other man, but I said he was very intolerant of sin. And sin, especially these hidden sins, can be like a virus. If you've ever had a sickness, a disease, or a virus, or an infection of some sort, when you start taking your medicine, the idea is you have to take your medicine until that infection, disease, or virus is completely gone. You've got to wipe it out. Does that make sense? Because if you leave a little bit there, it can come back stronger than before and do much more damage. So with these sicknesses, and sin is one of them, we have to be brutal in getting rid of it. Leave the smallest amount there, and it'll come back and destroy our lives. It can come back and kill us. And so the Lord is saying, be as brutal with sickness, of sin, as you would be with sickness. If your hand was leprous and you left it, it would kill you. You've got to cut it off so that you don't die. And it's the same with sin. And some of our sin can be so personal, so nice, so comfortable, that the last thing we want to do is get rid of it. And sometimes these sins are relationships. Sometimes these sins are positions of power. Sometimes these sins are possessions that we just cannot do without. And they separate us from God. I was thinking, this all, to me, as I was preparing the sermon, I was thinking, this is all very negative, this sort of talk of sin and cutting it off, isn't it? It's all very negative. And I was thinking, what's this got to do, in a sense, with Jesus? And how does he fit into this idea of cutting off limbs and pulling out eyes? We have a sin that we're to cut off. An eye, an arm, a leg, whatever it might be. But if we look there at the cross, it wasn't an arm or a foot or an eye that was cut off. He became sin. He became sin. It wasn't an arm or a leg or an eye that had to be cut off, killed. His whole body was given up to free us from sin, to enable us to have life. This is the good news. It's not something that Jesus hasn't done already for us, that he's asking us to do. We're being asked to cut off an arm. He's given his body. So let's not shirk. Let's not wriggle out and try to hold on to that sin. Let's give it up so that we can rise to new life with him.